So hi everybody, thank you for signing in and joining us today. We're going to take a look at how we can do enhanced model checking with the fire stopping resources that we have in Solibri Office. This is a follow-on from some previous webinars that we've done that we'll talk about and share some links and things. Today's presenters are going to be Nigel from Evolve, Aubrey from McLaren and Simon from Solibri. And we'll do the introductions when we get to the appropriate stages. So I'm Ken from Solibri. I'm just here. You don't have to listen to me for long. I'm just here to do this first bit of the housekeeping, the introduction and the boring stuff, and then we'll go into the main presenters. But just to make you all aware, this session is being recorded. So if you miss any parts or you want to go over any parts, we will share a recording with everybody later. And likewise, anybody that's registered will get a copy of the recording as well. We have muted all the microphones. We're expecting a big attendance here today, and I can see there's still quite a few people signing in, so I'll slow down. Yeah, we'll carry on. But your microphones are muted, so a couple of things. There's a Q&A at the very end of the session where you get a chance to ask your questions and put them to the panel. But if you do have any questions, because we're all muted, there's going to be several hundred people here. So because you're muted, if you've got any questions, to the side of your screen, there is a GoToWebinar panel that you can go into, and you'll see there's a questions area, and you can type your questions into there and they'll pop up on screen. I can see I've got one already, so I know that works, so that's all good. First thing I'm going to do is just a quick poll, which there's people still signing in, but hopefully. So this first poll is just really to find out if you guys already use the software and if you use the extension that gives you the fire stopping resources. So if you don't mind, we'll give that 20-30 seconds and see what the response is. Okay, so we've got a nice even split. That's not even at all. You'll see in a second. Yeah, let's go with that. We'll take those results. So thanks for doing that. So what we've found as it shares the results, we've got 15% of you already use the BIM Coordination Plus extension. A whole load of half of you using Solibri Office. So with a valid subscription and maintenance agreement, you have access to this BIM Coordination Plus extension. So we'll talk about the resources. Nigel's going to show you the workflow and stuff, and some others that we don't already use the software, but we're quite happy to talk about that. So it's quite a good selection of people. So carrying on, as I say, if you need to ask some questions, you can ask them in there, but quick run through the agenda. So we're going to have the introduction and timeline. That's going to be done by Simon. Then we're going to hand over to Nigel to run through the practical, the workflow, what you can get from it, and the outcomes and benefits and things. Then we're going to hand over to Aubrey, who will talk about how we've worked with them to further enhance where we picked up and where we carried on from previous development works. And then we'll come back to Simon to talk about what's coming up in the future. And then, as I say, we'll come over to the Q&A. We've got some other bits and pieces, some links to resources. So if you don't already have the extension, we'll talk about how you can get it and what resources and what help and training are available as well. So we'll switch over to that. But for now, what I'm going to do is hand over to Simon, and he's going to run through the timeline. So let me swap over. Should be with you now, Simon.
Okay, let me just share my screen. There we go. So hopefully everybody can see that. So I'm Simon Gilbert. I'm the Technical Services Manager with Solibri UK Limited. And really, before we get into the two main presentations here, just like to sort of give you a bit of a timeline of the BIM Coordination Plus extension, which is the fire stopping solution, and what it's all about and how it's progressed. So if we look at the image on the right hand side, you can see it's all about that containment of fire, so the compartmentation. Where we have breaches in any of those compartmentation walls and floors, obviously they have to be plugged with fire seals, and it's really to ensure that the safe passage of the building occupants in the event of a fire. Now, none of this is new. This has been going on for many years. What's actually happening over time really is to ensure that that those fire seals are checked and they conform to manufacturer requirements. And this has been sort of accelerated by, obviously, first in the UK, we had the terrible disaster, the Grenfell Tower disaster in 2017. And then obviously from that point onwards, the independent report by Dame Judith Hackett, basically, which is the independent review of building regulations and fire safety, titled Building a Safer Future, was all about reforming that legislation documentation, adding to the extra roles, responsibilities, and the introduction of things like the golden thread, to name just a few things that report actually advised, basically. On top of that, in May 2021, as a customer insights webinar, we carried out a digital fire compliance webinar with Ridge & Partners. So that was Brent Rees and Alex Plenty. So thank you very much for their contribution there. They were showing what they were doing from a digital fire compliance point of view inside Solibri for, as a service, just with the rules out of the box. So hats off to them to be able to achieve some of those things. You can see on screen already they were checking the distance between the services and also to the edges of the aperture. Not always hugely easy, as you'll see from probably what Nigel's going to go through, related to the fact that obviously the services need to have information about the materiality, sizes, and the walls obviously have fire ratings, and the fire seal, obviously you've got to conform to what the requirements of that fire seal are. So a really good webinar, good turnout for that one as well. And in June 2022, so a year sort of later, we did another presentation with Ridge & Partners, but it was really headed up by the Cabinet Office and Dr. David Hancock, who's the construction director. It was really a case of the results of the reforms that are being made from the Hackett report and how they would be made and pushed into the Building Safety Act. So what was apparent from that in May 2021 was we were getting a huge number of questions from a lot of our larger customers asking for a solution to checking fire stopping, and maybe this is down to the fact of the increased level of responsibility and not wanting to appear negligent and wanting to provide a lot of the information for that golden thread of data, really. So we looked together with a group of our customers at the fire stopping of service penetrations best practice in design and installation guide you can see on screen, particularly the area to do with the golden rules and the spatial requirements for those services. And that's what we concentrated on for this specification for the rules that we have now, basically. We then saw the introduction of the Building Safety Act in April 2022. And we started coding after we got the approval for the obviously funding of this in June 22. It also happened after because we were doing the DCOM project as well, which is the digital compliance project. So it sort of naturally sort of went on. So if it seems like a bigger gap, that's the reason why. We then had a release, the first initial release in January 2023, where we created 14 rules, all specifically for the delivery of results for checking fire stopping. And then 6 months later, in June 2023, we had two versions, so version 2 and 2.1. Version 2 added 3 additional rules, and 2.1 basically fixed a few bugs as well as some sort of fundamental improvements based upon customer input from around the globe, really, as these rules are being used all around the world. And finally, we released in 2024 version 2.2, which added a lot of smarts to the rules. So the ability to check whether or not the rules were up to date with the input spreadsheets which drive the rules, multi-row evaluation with those rules, so we can actually identify which rows would pass in a spreadsheet. And on top of that, we also increased the quality of the checking from a point of view of distances. So no longer will we be checking on the distance rule, just a global distance around the objects. We could do top, bottom, and sides, and so independently with those results as well. So I mean, the key thing really is here is that the work started in June 2022. But literally every week that the work was actually being carried out, we were providing prototypes to Lango, Rourke and BDP Pattern, who were using those rules in anger on the Everton Football Club new stadium, where they were designing and checking over 15,000 fire seals. So they used the combination of the rules directly inside Solibri to check for things like data and everything else, as well as some of the geometric type rules, and they paired those with the rules that we created for the initial release and the ongoing releases. So it has been used in anger on a large project, and the webinars, as you've seen on these screens, we've put the QR codes, but we'll also send you a follow-up email with those updates. So thank you again to Lango, Rourke and BDP Pattern, as well as Ridge and Partners, for sort of highlighting sort of what was possible, and our customers driving the need, and hopefully you know, we keep that kind of trend going. So that was just I'll come back at the end to show you what we've done since this date, but that's a quick timeline before we move on to Nigel.
Thanks, Simon. I'll pass the screen over to Nigel. We'll go now. Should be with you, Nigel. Perfect, thanks. Good to go. Yeah, yep.
All good. Okay, so thank you for coming along. I'm going to be, for the next 15-20 minutes, just taking you through the requirements of how to get the most out of the fire stopping rules and the resources available to you there in Solibri. We've been doing quite a lot of work with Simon and Ken on putting the implementation of the rules into practice. We have now developed fire stopping rules for a number of Solibri customers. But what I wanted to do was just take you through, you don't need to see my slide about my history and stuff. What I wanted to do was just talk about the importance of data and understanding where you are in your project to get the most out of the rule sets. So one of the things that we always talk to everybody about when they're doing any work in with models, either in Solibri or any kind of IFC analysis, is the critical thing with your models is to make sure that the data you're receiving is complete and consistent. Without it, things are very difficult to assess and identify inside of a model. And with the fire stopping rules, that's even more critical. So this is actually a screenshot from the demo set that Simon was working with to test the rules. And as you can see, if I pull up data on any one of these objects, there is a lot of information in there. And it's critical to start before you get even checking in the models to know what data you need. Now, if you're working with fire stopping and you are at construction stage and you're used to the procurement process, you're used to the installation process, you will know what is needed. It's quite common though for people to pick up models, open them up inside of Solibri, set the rules running, and are unsure or don't understand how to get the results out of the model. So what I've done is actually gone through just a couple of slides here to show you the kind of considerations you need to be taken into account to get the most from these rules. Now, that's not saying you have to have answers to all these questions that I'm going to pose in just a second. because it really does depend on where you are in the project and what you're trying to achieve. For example, the fire stopping rules have no consideration whether you are working with complete manufacturers' fire stopping objects, or you're just working with builders work placeholders at early design stages. The rules don't care. What you have to do is to identify what the objects are and then work with the data you've got to get the results out. So before I even launch into this, the fire stopping rules have a place at both ends of the spectrum, early design stage and at installation and completion stages, but it all depends on the data that you've got, what you can actually get out of it. So enough of the kind of general intro there. Some of the things that need to be considered when you are working with the fire stopping rules. We produce at the start of every project that we're working with where fire stopping is required, we have got a pro forma that we go through, and this is actually just textual excerpts from it, to try and identify from the design teams or the construction teams exactly what data they have, and if it's not available in the model, where do we get it from? So the first basic principle you have to start with is what forms your fire compartments. It's easy enough to say, oh yes, we know where all the fire compartments are, but in terms of logic, you need to be able to identify those inside of Solibri to allow Solibri to do the work that it's expecting to do. So in terms of that, you need basic wall ID properties, which I won't say quite as much as 9 times out of 10, but certainly 70, 75% of the time, to mix my metaphors, this information isn't available on the first issue of the model that you get. And I don't mean first issue as in the first, stage 2, stage 3 version of it. The first iteration of the model you get at any stage, most of this data is missing. It might exist inside the authoring tool, but it hasn't been exported correctly, so you can't do anything with it because it just doesn't exist in the IFC. So first thing you need to be able to identify is what are the wall types you're working with. Basic things like what's the fire rating, what's the acoustic rating of those walls, if you need to analyze that information. And the same goes for the horizontal dividers as well. In terms of the slab properties, you need to be able to identify which slabs you're working, what type of slabs you're working with, whether they should have fire seals or not. Again, fire rating, acoustic rating, all those kind of things that need to be held into account for you to be able to get the most out of these rules. And then last but not least, probably the most important part of it is what elements are you working with? How do you identify where a fire seal or a placeholder in the early stages should actually be? And if you're doing that, has the model been constructed in a way that works to allow you to extract that information? So the builders work placeholders or the fire stopping elements themselves, they ought to be filling a void in order for some of the checks inside of Solibri to be run. You will obviously need to know what manufacturer you're working with, or just be able to identify different builders work placeholders at different times by a simple ID, which is the way we work at the early stages of a project. We might just have BW type 1, BW type 2, those kind of things. But you need to know the difference, because as you come on through design, there will be more and more exacting requirements added to those fire seals. There needs to be an element there. I know this sounds really silly, but there needs to be a solid element there to be able to identify it. Voids alone are not enough. You need something to fill the void. You quite often see it in early stage building services models where they will have put just a mass object down or something to represent where this information is passing through slabs. That's good enough at the early stages, but as you get on through, you need to be thinking about building that information. In terms of something that Simon mentioned earlier, you need to know details of what services you're going to check. Okay, are you going to be checking, where ducts, air terminals, dampers pass through compartmentation walls and slabs, or are you only interested in the electrical side of things? Are you only interested in cable trays? But more importantly, what services can pass through each fire seal? Can you have multiple equipment passing through the same fire seal, or do they need to separate out? So to do that, you need to be able to identify those services in your model. That might sound really obvious and simple, but it's actually the one hardest thing that we always find in any model is services equipment and identifying it. What is obvious to a services engineer or somebody looking at the model from an educated perspective, that's an air handling unit, that's a valve, that's a transformer, whatever, that's pretty straightforward and you understand it. To actually pull that data out of the model and differentiate between what could be potentially just two cubes on the screen, that's difficult if you haven't got the data associated to those elements. So you need to be able to identify both the service and the equipment type and individual IDs for those equipment, should it matter, a material, a description, sizes, all the things listed there. And if you are just looking at certain services, are they split down into the correct system? Is there an ID there that allows you to differentiate between a hot water run and a cold water run, or whatever it is you need to differentiate between? And then, of course, in terms of accessibility, you also need to consider the spaces. There needs to be some kind of thing, for example, added to the spaces, or to be able to identify them in some way, to identify whether they are accessible or inaccessible spaces. Are they spaces within a dry riser, or are they spaces that can be accessed through a room? Those kind of things that need to be identified that you probably won't think of in the first iteration of the model. Now, in terms of this, a lot of the information can then be gathered from the manufacturer's information. And here's just a generic screenshot of the kind of information you might be getting from a manufacturer's specification. It will say things like the minimum and maximum distances you can have between elements. This PDF, for example, goes on to say what equipment can be used within the same fire seal, and we'll go through all the different fire seal types to show you which ones are required for the different types of equipment passing through them. But this data, you know, you can see down there the kind of things you need to be considering if you're getting into the installation and detail side of this at construction. This is actually stored inside of the Solibri rule set as a spreadsheet. I have got a quick example of a generic one here. Let me just call it up on the screen to show you what we're dealing with. So there is an action that you need to take to get that information and to pull it into this spreadsheet. Now, this is just a generic example that we work with at the start of projects, but you can see the kind of things that we're dealing with here. Maximum and minimum widths, fire ratings of certain element walls and slab types. Actually, in this case, it's a wall that that can be used to narrow down what it is you're actually doing and make sure your design is actually verifiable. There's an awful lot of different tabs in here, but Solibri have done a really good job and provided some examples as part of the BIM coordination set. You can go to their website, I'm sure they'll share the links later, show you where you can download these to actually use as examples. As I said, there's a lot of data to fill in, but you can't expect this to be complete at the start of a project. As I said, this is just a generic one. You can see I'm using wildcards here just to say, look, any wall with a source fire seal type of BW star for builder's work, or anything that contains builder's work in the name. You can keep it generic to get the best out of it at early stages. Only when you're working at later stages and you know what manufacturer you're working with, you can take the data and you can transform it into these spreadsheets. I would highly recommend speaking to your manufacturers if you're at that stage to see whether they have already got that data in either a CSV or spreadsheet format that you can work with, because that's going to make translating the data out of the PDF into the spreadsheet easier. But what's key to all of this, as I move on to the second set and show you some example rule sets, is that you ask for the information that you need right at the start of a project. This is an excerpt from one of our requirements matrices that we use at the start of a project for identifying what data is needed. Yes, you know, by standard we include a load of stuff for Kobe, but in terms of actually separating that out, in terms of fire extinguishing systems and stopping systems, what additional properties are needed? And more importantly, what additional properties or parameters do you need to fill out in the authoring tools? Where will they end up in the IFC, so that when you come into the Solibri rule sets, you know exactly where you're looking for that data and you can pull it out, use it in the rules as necessary. So that's kind of a bit of preamble of the work that we tend to do when we're looking at this for customers. But for now, I just want to show you how we've set up a demo set of rules to show you the kind of workflow that we go through when we're working actually inside of Solibri. So here is a really simple test model that we've built. All this model does, it takes each of the rules that we're working with and puts in criteria that we can see to work out whether it's working or not. The hardest thing working with these rules, apart from knowing which one to use, is identifying the data that you need to pull into it to start with. And when we're doing this, the first thing that we always start with, for those of you familiar with Solibri, which seems to be about 60–70% of you on this webinar at the moment, first thing that we do is start with building classifications to identify the information that we need. So for example, here is a classification that we work with to identify at the design stages a simple way of identifying the different builders' works. And as you can see in our example here, as soon as I use that classification, it's identifying that the builders' works placeholders are in the model. If it was a later stage, I would have a fire seals classification, which looks at different data and it's probably a little bit more complex than just these 3 lines to identify where the data is and the different fire seal types that are being used in the model. But without that in the model, you've got no hope of these working. So we build that, we build the different types of, what doors and windows should be included, what floors, are there any obstructions to the installation? They're all built as separate classifications, which are then used in the rules to generate the results quickly and easily. So if I come back in and just show you the way that this is a template that we start from. The hardest thing of this all the time, as I've said, is getting the data from your customer or your client that you're working with and get that built into these rules so it works. The rules, I don't want to go into the whole way they work in too much detail, but the basics are, unlike most Solibri rules that require separate entries and parameters for each of the rules, most of these point or can point back to a common parameter set, which is, if I just open this and show you this basic one here, it goes back and allows you to differentiate between these different classifications. What are you using for your walls? Well, in this case, we are using, if I just pull that out for walls, we're using any wall that is part of the fire stopping rules wall classification is defined. If you understand Solibri, you'll understand what that means. If not, take it from me. Once it's set up, it now knows all the different pieces you use. Rather setting this for each rule, set it once and then call each rule to look at this instead. So the parameters in some of these rules, for example, are a lot simpler. Instead of having all those parameters again to identify which walls, which services you're working with, you could just point it back to the common parameters, and then there may be some additional parameters that you need to fill in and what result options you want to show. Principles of that work for most Solibri rules, but this one is, these are much better in the fact that these parameters are set once. And I did actually want to mention that at the bottom here, they also point to these spreadsheets to pick up the requirements for either the design generic requirements, or in this one, the construction stage fire stopping requirements that will get built up over time. So once that's done, at the early stage of a project, we're not going to get as much information out of this. We're certainly not going to be able to look at things like the manufacturer's information because we just won't have it. So typically, and this is just a sample of 5, we will build design stage rules that allow us to check that the design is progressing well. And one of those here, services locations where fire seals are required. If I just brown box this again a second, you can see that we've got a series of walls, but if we just look at these at this end and I look at the results, you'll see that whole wall set and services are excluded from the results I've got. There they are there, because this is not a fire compartment wall. This one is, this one isn't. That has to be identified, and we do that through one of the properties in the model to identify the wall type to say that it's a fire compartment wall. And that's what these results show. So they will then show for each of these where a service penetrates the compartment. Nothing more than that. We rename the rules to make logical sense of them, of what we're trying to achieve. It shows services locations where fire seals are required. That's what this rule is doing. And there they are, all the way through the model. That is whether it penetrates the the compartment directly, or it penetrates without an opening, as you can see there, or it doesn't penetrate fully. Anywhere a service comes up against this compartmentation, this rule is showing that. And we'll take that further then. We'll go down through a series of rules that then say, well, there must be at least a placeholder at any one of these positions. So in this case, these two will fail this rule. And there they are. It's actually showing that it's failed, even though this one here doesn't have an opening and it doesn't have a fire seal. This one doesn't pass through fully. And this one passes through an opening, but there's no fire seal in the model to cover it. However, this one does have a fire seal. It doesn't have an opening, so that one passes the rule. You need to know what you're looking at to get the results out of this. We also do some simple checks to pick up things like this, where there are builders work placeholders with no services going through. Obviously at stage 3 design, that may be where the services model hasn't caught up, or builders work has been placed in behind the design has moved on. You obviously need to pick this kind of thing up to make sure that you're working with the latest information. And then one other, which is actually a very good result here, is looking at where door positions are and where studs would actually be generated to show whether they pass through potential services information. It doesn't say this is wrong, it's just highlighting where there might be a problem, because obviously other joists can be built here, and actually alternative arrangements can be made if it's not possible to move the ducts, but it just highlights those positions. So at early stage design, we're doing some simple things to check these things out. And actually, some of these rules aren't even fire stopping rules. Some of them are just generic rules that we've used to help identify where information is needed. Just closing up now in my last couple of minutes, moving on from there, then we build detail in at construction stage. When we're working with more information, we will then start to do more checks. Some of them are the same, except we're looking at a different set of data here. Instead of the builder's work, we'll be looking at fire seals to make sure that they are complete. But we'll be looking at things now, such as, are fire seals an allowable size? This one, it's picking up here that the dimension of the fire seal is actually too large. It can't be constructed using the type of fire seal that we have specified. All that information is coming back from this common parameters and the spreadsheet. It will look at whether things are positioned according to the manufacturer's specifications, whether the fire seals have actually got correct spacing. So again, are they constructible? As you can see here, these are just too close. There's not enough wall material between to support them. We'll also do separate services checks to make sure that they fit within fire seals. Obviously that one's going to get picked up again there, that they're passing through an allowable angles to make sure that that's allowable from the services manufacturer. And there will also be checks in here to make sure that you've only got the allowable services within the same fire stop type. Conveniently, there's also a check that I'll finish on. If you're using manufacturer's information, there's a check in here that will identify whether the data you're working with is complete or not, which is a really good help to work out whether you've got all the information you need. As you can see in this one, there are certain things that are missing, and it tells me I'm missing information on the wall support tab for the fire seal of this type and a service penetration or a service passing through it of pipe. I haven't got enough detail at this stage. Doesn't mean it's wrong. I may not have that information, but that's a really good check to make sure that you are considering the data that's needed. So before I pass on over to Dobry, just a quick kind of summary there, that the benefits are, or the outcomes are what you need them to be at the stage of the project you're working with. Don't think because you can put all this data in there that you need to. This is not limited to detailed construction requirements. What it is, it's helping you to understand these other things. Is the design correct and complete? Are the solutions constructible, as it says here on the screen? And importantly, at the stage you're at, are you meeting the requirements that you need to for the project? Is the golden thread important to you? Is the Building Safety Act, if you're in the UK, important to you? Yes or no? At least you are working with these rules to help you understand whether your design and construction is meeting those requirements. And just work with the information you have available. If you don't have it, you can still get very useful results out of these rule sets. But unlike what I showed you there, which is just a sample set, don't have them as a totally separate rule set. Build these in as part of your regular model check. So as you're going through and you're trying to identify, I don't know, whether there are 15 doors and whether they've all been named correctly, put these rules in there at early stages to get it part of your regular coordination exercise and design checks on your models. Keep it there and you'll get the best out of this that you can. Again.
Okay, fantastic. Thanks, Nigel. I'm just going to hand over to Dobry in just a second. He's going to continue and discuss how he's worked with us using the resources, but also to help enhance the offering that we have and improve things, which Simon will come back on and round up towards the end. So that should now be passing over to you now, Dobry. Got it. Perfect. Thank you.
Hello. Can you see my screen?
Yeah, we can see it. That's perfect. Thanks.
Thank you for inviting McLaren Construction Group to join this event. It's a pleasure to be here and having the opportunity to share our user experience and to support the fact that collaboratively we can achieve better things. My name is Dobry Georgiev. I'm a digital construction manager and I'm with McLaren since October 2023. I moved from Bulgaria energy and gas sector to the UK construction in 2016, and I've been through few workplaces since then and titles, but generally all the time I was using software model review software daily. Few words about McLaren Construction Group. McLaren started as a family business in 2001 and now is a tier 1 contractor, employs 900 people, and we are about to break the 1 billion annual turnover barrier. Notable projects have included XL London expansion, the Salvation Army's new headquarters, and F1 head office facility for Aston Martin. Also projects for top developers such as British Land, Viva and Landsec. With the growth of the company, there was a need for a growth for a lot of our processes and systems too. McLaren used to rely quite heavily on external consultants for this. And Thomas Flannery, head of digital construction, has grown the digital construction team, which I'm part of. He implemented a new software regime that is transforming internal efficiencies. And one of these is using Solibri as our main tool for design coordination. So we hired Evolve Consultancy to help us with the first steps of the implementation of Solibri. And they are the experts in the field, basically. So it was very important to do this in the right way from the beginning. They produced our templates, rule sets, classifications, ITO templates, which are shown on the screen. And they showed us also how to use them. So currently we are still on the learning curve, but we are using Solibri on 5 live projects, 3 of which are shown on the screen. Commercial office building with public garden, mixed use commercial and retail development, which is Grafton Street, office refurbishment job, 10 Spring Gardens, and we are also using Solibri for our work winning, analyzing the state of coordination for projects we are bidding for. We chose Solibri because we have inspirations to do things which are beyond clash detection. We like calling it design validation. And apparently the model elements are not just some dummy objects, but they are defined by their function, which we can use to check against the Solibri predefined rules. For example, this door, which the software recognized the opening direction and recognizing the clashes and visualizing them. For our business, it's very important to communicate coordination issues to our partners, and time matters when it comes to issues identification, visualization, and sharing, and the clarity of the issues which we are sharing has important role for others who are reading the issues to understand what it is about. So in this regard, picture is saying 1,000 words. Also, the amount of help and training resources which enables us as a team to expand our knowledge and capabilities. That's another reason we chose using Solibri, and we are delighted to be meeting Solibri team every quarter, and having the time spent with them help us to tailor our roadmap, to roadmap our improvement, but also to understand what's on their horizon as well. What are their future developments? I mentioned earlier design validation, and a wonderful example is what are the fire stopping rules. They allow us to meet the legislations or regulations requirements and to plan better and check the fire safety. Currently, we use mostly the fire stopping identity rule, basically the rules which are highlighted in green on the picture on the left. We use proximity rule, we use general distance rule, and the start opening clash rule. Nigel have presented pretty much all of them earlier. Being set up once, they require little to no maintenance to run with every design iteration, and this makes the process really efficient and it saves time. Another example is fire stopping proximity rule. Checking the distance between services. 300 is the minimum requirement on the picture, and we have 255. The software generates this visual automatically, so basically Solibri is doing the hard work by annotating and expressing what the issue is in the description field. Another example is fire stopping identity rule, which identifies where service penetrations occur with compartmentation along with an optional check for coverage by a fire seal. It can check if there is a fire seal in place. It detects instances of penetrations through openings or potential gaps or cutouts in the model, and it can bridge service joint gaps that would otherwise not fully penetrate. So we were inspired to do more things with Solibri and to be able to integrate it in our processes, like builders work, and we are aiming to reduce the amount of usage of 2D by automating the checks in 3D. It looks blurry for some reason. A typical builders work process would have the steps like MEP service engineer declare where the desired position of the hole is by placing the builders work placeholder. Position and size of the hole are getting approved, and then a void is being created by the respective wall or slab designer. And as lead appointed party, our role is to monitor the coordination process and to capture issues if there are any. So essentially, we have three separate elements. We have wall, we have MEP, and builder's work placeholder, and without the fire stopping identity rule will be the perfect match, the perfect tool to utilize this. So just instead using fire seals, we are using builder's work placeholders. And in theory, all boxes are ticked. There are two examples on the screen of the results which you get. So on the left example, there is a wall severity issue created, pointing that there is a fire seal on place, which means for us, MEP team have done their job by placing the fire seal. And on the example on the right, a high severity issue is created with missing fire seal, which is written in the description. There was only one small detail to be perfect for our use case, and that's the identity rule does not check if there is a void created. So we cannot check if the wall or slab designer has done their part of the builder's work process. On the screen, the result description are identical to both for both cases. Like the description of the issues are identical, but if you take a look at the bottom, the picture show that on the left there is no void created, and on the right there is created, and yeah, the identity rule don't capture this. But at the same time, the purpose of the rule apparently is to identify where service penetrations occur with compartmentation, which the rule is doing it right. And I'll finish soon, but last thing we'll also mention that we've encountered some anomalous results, like how builders work placeholders wasn't picked up by the identity rule, or by, I think picked up by all rules actually initially, and the fire damper touching the slab, which is on the picture on the center, it was registered as service which do not fully pass through compartmentation. For us, such results should be they are such like false positives and would be more useful to be identified separately. And the last example is the ducts which are on the right. They are intersecting with two adjacent faces of a wall, which was registered as a full penetration. So we reached out to Solibri with these examples, and they responded straight away. We shared samples with them, and Simon took these initial internally for a review with their engineering team. We were asked for our opinion how this can be improved. We were really glad to be part of the process and feeling great that we were contributing in perfectioning in their amazing product. I wanted to say thank you about this, and now I'm returning to Simon. Thank you.
Perfect. That's brilliant. Thanks very much, Dobry. I will pass over to Simon. Should be coming up on screen with you now.
Okay. Thanks, Dobry, and also Nigel for a great presentation, both indicating the what's needed within the application at relevant stages and how you can maximise the use of those rules, and also Dobry's usage basically of the rules, and so the shortcomings really that we have to listen to customers, and from a point of view of McLaren here. It's invaluable for us to actually make sure that we make these changes and improve them for everybody really. So again, thanks once again to our customers basically who are feeding back to us, because we do want to hear from where they're working, where they're not working correctly, to actually fix those issues. So as a result of talking to Dobry and the team there at McLaren, we received a number of the models that that come through. So this is what's going to be coming in an upcoming release. The coding has been done. We just need to do some bug testing really. I need to send this through to Dobry so he can test it before us. But what we've done is we've looked at some of the issues that we found initially with some of the models that were coming through. So one of those items were, and this did happen on one model right at the early stages, but we didn't ever see it again. But what we were seeing was fire seals, rather than being modeled as a solid object, they were being modeled as like sleeves, or maybe they were sleeves, or maybe they are the actual framing for the fire seals themselves. But what you end up with is no clash with the services passing through those physical seals. And then when you're running any of the rules, like the distance rule in this case here, then obviously it can't measure to anything because there's nothing there. So what we've done is we've fixed that. So any rule that utilizes the fire seals will now take into account the any hollow fire seals or sleeved based fire seals. This tends to happen with products that people will be using MagicAD. And some of the other applications as well. It just seems to be that the sort of two frames of logic here as far as different methodology of generating these fire seals, or the placeholders, the BWICs for them. So we fixed that in that particular rule, and from Dobrie's other requirements, which is to look at those different cases. So the identification rule at the present moment, what it does, it actually looks at any of the penetrations of the services that go through the compartmentation walls or floors. When it finds one of those, it then will display that as a result, but it has the option of saying, is it covered by a fire seal, an opening, or a BWIC. Now, when I say opening, it would have to be a physical opening component, a void, whatever. If it's just open, then obviously the rule at that point wouldn't actually deliver that opening component. It still finds any intersection where there is an opening there, so so if the service goes through, it's not doing a general intersection rule with the wall. If there's an opening, it will still detect that as a service penetration. But what we wanted to do is do those different cases as far as the different options of those buildability checks to ensure that we have got an opening and a fire seal for each of those conditions. So for the identification rule at the moment, we've added some extra sort of checks in there, and you can choose to do them all in one go, or you can actually have them as separate rules. So what we're looking for here is where we see a service penetration that goes through a compartmentation wall or floor. What we actually want is an opening component and a fire seal. Now, the opening component could just be a hole, so we're not searching for a physical component here, but in this instance, as long as it doesn't actually clash with the physical wall geometry, then we know that there is an opening for the services to pass through. And then there's the other sort of fail conditions where we've got a situation here where we haven't got an opening and we haven't got a fire seal. And these continue through. So in this case, we have got the opening for this cable tray or cable carrier, and we've got the no fire seal in it. And finally, for this this cable ladder here, we haven't got an opening, but we've got a fire seal object. So as I've said already, the identification rule, you can actually take this rule and tick individual boxes like you would do in a general intersection rule to say, I only want to check, say, condition 1, 2, 3, or 4. What's interesting is the first result, which is a passed result. On some of the rules inside Solibri, it's not in all the default rules in Solibri don't ever show you what's passed. You can actually look at the components that have passed, but you don't see a result like a failed result of the groupings of elements that have passed. In a lot of the Solibri fire stopping rules, we give you the option of visualizing that as well as part of the rules. And this one's no different in the fact that you have an option to say, show me all the ones that do have both. So you can actually review them and check them if you wanted to. So I see this being used as sort of the last three are checked, if you're with me, and the first one would be a separate rule, or you would separate them all out into individual rules. But it gives you that sort of flexibility for that buildability checks to obviously have those discussions with the relevant bodies, M&E engineers or structural engineers for the holes or the definition of the fire seals themselves. So that's what we've done with the buildability checks. But on top of that, as Dobry sort of indicated, we wanted to also make sure that partial service penetrations are picked up. So this can happen where there's either a modeling mistake where the service fully penetrates a wall vertically or something like that and goes right the way through it, or in this case on screen, as you can see, it doesn't fully go through the it terminates within the compartmentation floor or wall. So it's important to pick these up. That might just be a modeling error. There might be another pipe or ductor component which is the same above it with a gap, and we've got that kind of provision to ensure that then it's continuous, although it shouldn't actually terminate within the wall itself or the floor. So we can pick those up as separate conditions, and we can also pick up the other condition, although this will be apparent with things like our distance rule, where it's checking the services to the aperture and between other services. So services to the aperture on this one would fail anyway because it actually overlaps the aperture. So what we're checking here is that the services physically go through the void and through the fire seal fully, so they're not partially covered in this case here. So again, those two options. So in this case, we've got 6 options for this rule. You can sort of choose any kind of match of those you want to actually tick, or you can actually do them all as separate sort of conditions if you want to. But that's what we've done as far as the update, and we're hoping to get that out sometime in sort of Q3. I don't see it being too long. We just need to check that that there's no sort of bugs in the code, and that'll then be released to the customers who are using the fire stopping. But thanks once again for the likes of for McLaren and Langer Rourke and Ridge and Partners and people like that who are using the rules and are contacting us and pushing us from a point of view of extra flexibility or functionality. I'd just like to say thank you. Okay, back to Ken.
Okay, thanks, Simon. I'll pass back to myself just to round things off. Right, apologies about that. It wouldn't be a live presentation if there wasn't something that was hidden somewhere. So let's talk really fast because apologies, we lost some time. So yeah, as I was saying, to get the resources, if you've already got Solibri but don't have the BIM Coordination Plus extension, which gives you access to all of the rules and resources, then what to do is use the QR codes. We'll share the full link in the follow-up email. But QR code will take you straight to the Fire Stopping Resources help page, or you can go to help.solibri.com, and if you just search for either Fire or BIM Coordination Plus, that will take you to the same page. If you're quite happy to just go and install the resources, then that's done through the Solution Centre. An admin has to make sure you have BIM Coordination Plus licenses assigned in your account. But again, part of the help will show you the instructions of what has to be done for the admin and also for the user to install the resources in the software itself. Beyond that, if you want to learn even more about this, we do offer 4 types of classroom training courses free to every customer with a valid maintenance or support agreement. They run every quarter. We are in the process. We had fundamentals last week. We will have advanced training next week. And then 2 weeks after that, on the 4th of June, we will have a fire stopping intro course. And then the day after, we'll have a Kobe intro course as well. If you want to find out more about that, if you want to register, if you go to the Eventbrite link on the screen, that will show you the dates, the times, all the details about it, and you can register for that if you want to attend. But other than that, that's the main sort of details. If you want to find out more, feel free to drop us an email and talk to us. Alternatively, we will be at Digital Construction Week on stand D650. Which is on the 5th and 6th of June. So if you're in the London area nearby, want to visit, come along and you get to meet us in person, which I don't know if that's a good thing. But anyway, so yeah, thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much to Nigel and Dobry for their presentation and everything else. Thanks to Simon as well, I suppose. But yes, thank you all for spending the time watching us here. As I say, the Q&A, we've run a little bit over time, so the Q&A session, looking at the questions, I think what we'll do is we'll leave the session open for a few minutes. If you have any other questions, feel free to drop them into the list. But what we'll do after the session is go through those and then come back to you individually to pick up anything that needs to be addressed and taken any further from there. But beyond that, as I say, thank you very much. If you have any further questions and want to get in touch, you will have follow-up emails, or you can drop an email to us at this address here. But as I say, we'll leave the session open for a couple of minutes so you can add any more questions, and we'll get back to you and follow up that way. So once again, thank you everybody for your time, and if you need anything, you know where to find us.